Hello, you've reached the Provincial Health Services Authority telephone line for medical assistance in dying.
Today, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau introduced legislation to legalize physician-assisted suicide.
It's a deeply personal issue that affects all of us.
Some believe it is their only option.
We are very concerned about the exclusion of individuals with mental illness.
No one should be faced with such an impossible choice.
Miguel is a 25-year-old cancer patient. He has been fighting cancer for 5 years now. He has been taking chemotherapy sessions, which are very costly on his end and for his family. However, despite his religious chemotherapy sessions, the spreading of the cancer just slows down. But the cancer is still there, as it is already in stage 4. His cancer is still eating away at his body, and now things have gone black. He is now bound to the end, and his family's financial status is also turning gray. Everything seems to be broken for him. He is now taking euthanasia into consideration to end all his and his family's suffering.
Euthanasia is a topic that always comes up to us doctors, no? It is never an easy decision to make, especially if you look at it from a moral perspective. It always pushes us to choose either to respect a patient's request to end suffering or respect a moral principle based on religion and opt with palliative care. Euthanasia may be defined as an action in which an individual is intentionally killed or may be allowed to die of circumstances where it is believed that the person will be better off dead. For example, in cases where my patients suffer from an irreversible coma or a brain-dead state where there are no chances of revival. In simple terms, it means to purposely bring a life to an end in order to release it from pain or suffering. Etymologically, the word euthanasia is derived of two Greek words, eu, which means easy, and thanatos, which means death. Put them together, hence a painless and easy death. It is also termed as mercy killing, as it is seen as a call for mercy for terminally ill patients. Euthanasia is done in two ways. Either it can be self-administered or other-administered. Self-administered, as the name suggests, means that the actions are done by the patients themselves. It can either be active positive or passive negative. Active positive is when patients deliberately terminate their lives by employing painless methods, a drug that lets them sleep per se, an act of commission. While it can also be passive negative when a patient refuses to take any medical form of treatment that prolongs or sustains their life, refusing to take medicine, or discontinuing life support, an act of omission. Now we go on to the other administered euthanasia, in which we have 4: active voluntary, active non-voluntary, passive voluntary, and passive non-voluntary. Active and voluntary. This happens when either I or the doctor, per the patient's request, a spouse or a close relative or a friend terminates the patient's life. It is voluntary since it is requested by the patient, and it is active because some positive means are used to terminate the patient's life. For example, Miggy, my patient, voluntarily agrees to do euthanasia in the form of taking lethal drugs. Secondly, passive and voluntary occurs when the patient is permitted to die by his or her physician, spouse, or immediate relative. It is passive because no positive methods are employed. Simply, the patient is allowed to die. It is voluntary since it is again done upon the patient's request. Example, Miggy voluntarily agrees to withdraw the process of his chemotherapy or life support. Active and non-voluntary. This is done similarly to active voluntary, only this time, the family, doctor, or friend decides to put an end to the patient's life without his or her consent. It is active since some positive method is enforced, taking a pill or drug, and non-voluntary since termination is decided by outside sources other than the patient. For example, Miggy's family agrees to do euthanasia without his consent in the form of injecting lethal drugs. This is only permissible if Miggy is in total unconscious state or at the very least unable to decide for himself, such as age is a factor or when you are a newborn baby. And lastly, passive non-voluntary. It is simply a way to put a patient's life to an end by using no positive methods, such as injecting a drug, and non-voluntary since other persons make the moral decision to terminate the patient's life. Example, Miggy's family agrees to withdraw the chemotherapy or life support. This again is only possible if Miggy, my patient, is in a total vegetative state, no signs of reason, life, or reaction.
There are two arguments for euthanasia. First is compassion for the suffering person. This has been a weak argument due to the advancements of modern medicine in which it's possible to remove pain from the patient without losing consciousness. The second one is about the patient's quality of life. This argument only gives people the right to decide whether the other person's life is still worth living for, prolonged, or valuable. So this basically represents a death sentence for the other person.
The Church does not condone any form of direct euthanasia in which the life of a person is intentionally taken from them. Although passive euthanasia is deemed morally allowable, palliative care is encouraged for the terminally ill because they have a right to meet natural death with dignity and receive ordinary care like painkillers, even though it may have a chance in shortening the patient's life. The Church teaches that we must take all proportionate means to preserve life if there is little hope for recovery.
This might be a controversial opinion, but I think it's fine in some ways.
There are various opinions regarding the morality of euthanasia. However, as we all know, euthanasia is regarded as the act or practice of ending a person's suffering from a painful and incurable disease by withholding treatment and life-sustaining measures, and injecting or ingestion of lethal drugs into one's system. With that simple definition, we may already conclude that euthanasia is morally unacceptable. Subsequently, from an ethical standpoint, active euthanasia, even if freely opted, is ethically reprehensible because it still encompasses murder. And even if the patient or person in agony requests euthanasia, it is still morally wrong and unacceptable because there is the presence of suicide, which is certainly ethically immoral. In simple terms, it is a form of assisted suicide. In essence, active euthanasia is immoral given that it goes beyond the person's control over his or her life, and it damages the relationship between humans and God, because we all know that our life is not ours, but it is only given by Him, and thus it is not our hands to decide whether or not our mission is fulfilled. On the other hand, passive euthanasia is morally allowable, according to the Church, as this does not use extraordinary means. It is not direct, and it is allowable under the principle of double effect. We can never make use of the freedom bestowed upon us for selfish reasons, such as ending our own or someone else's life. We can never permit ourselves to employ democratic processes in the fundamental rights to exist. We have no right to die since it goes against our human nature, and it is not morally permissible or reasonable for us to dictate our end, since it violates a cardinal principle, the right to life. In other words, the only right we have is to die with dignity.
As a Christian, the teachings of the Church emphasize a strong connection between suffering and the forgiveness of sins. I believe that humanity finds redemption through Christ's suffering, passion, crucifixion, and death. The idea of incarnation, where God becomes human, highlights the immense value of Christ's suffering, providing a way for the forgiveness of sins for everyone throughout history.
So personally, I never really thought of the idea of death until it was my time to face it. You know, I was in denial, I was confused. I thought maybe the doctors made a mistake, or maybe they were reading another patient's diagnosis. But when it was my time to face the truth, I turned angry. I had so much anger towards everyone, towards the doctors, towards my family, but especially towards myself. I kept asking questions like, what did I do to deserve this? Like, why me? Why did I have to die? But eventually that anger did subside, and I became a person that was bargaining. I asked the doctors if they had, any way to save me. I asked the nurses, I asked God, I asked anyone to please just save me. But when they had no other choice, I had no other choice. The bargaining stopped, and I faced the truth. I was depressed. I was unresponsive. I was despondent, and I just stopped talking to anyone. I was in a daze. I was reminiscing about my life, about what everything has come to, and what the fruition of my life is. Eventually, I started to accept it. Bit by bit, I came to face the truth that my life was gonna be over, and death was waiting for me. So when I accepted it, I accepted the idea of death. It was as if nothing even mattered anymore, and I accepted it. I was okay with it.
Euthanasia is a moral issue that should be taken seriously and with careful consideration. This process holds a lot of viewpoints regarding how it should be implemented, its morality, and the people in the church's opinion on this issue. Thus, there should be more open discussions regarding euthanasia. And in doing so, people must be respectful of the different opinions or stances people may have.
One, two, three. Tingin lang muna sa papel. Hindi mo kaya, boy. There are various opinions regarding the morality of euthanasia. However, as we all know, euthanasia, mabagal. Magkagagalaw. Hoy! Go. Sana sabay yung tingin, di ba?
Individual is intentionally killed or allowed to die because of circumstances where it is believed that the person will be dead. Blah, 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 blah. No! Ulit.